Welcome in person and on Zoom to our How to Navigate Rising Anti-Semitism in your schools and in your campuses. And in your communities. And we are thrilled, not thrilled to have to deal with Jewish hatred, but we're excited to join forces with Debbie from Vital Transformations and her son Yehuda from NJU Hatred. So Courtney and I, along with our friend Alana, who's not here, started Yisrael Yentas as a response to October 7th. And we're a group of secular Jewish women who, despite only visiting Israel once or twice, we knew we had to help. We felt really compelled to come together as a community of Jews who, for the first time, were really saying that we're Jewish rather than New Yorkers. And living in New York City, which is the second largest Jewish community outside of Israel, the past few decades, we've been very lucky as Jewish people. We have not had obvious anti-Semitism that you're now seeing right now. So we, while it might feel new to us, it's actually been very trendy to hate Jews, starting even in the Middle Ages. But I think not only is the overt anti-Semitism we're experiencing really scary, but it's also the silence of the non-Jews around us that's really scary and hard to navigate. And last night, we were at an AJC parent empowerment event, and Dr. Laura Shaw Frank, who led the meeting, she mentioned that a head of a New York independent private school said that he realized that the parents, Jewish parents, they weren't upset necessarily about, the reason they were so upset about the response or lack of response was sort of this intergenerational trauma that Jews have surrounding Gentile silence. And I think that's why we were all so upset post-October 7th, is not what people said, it's the lack of what people said. So today, we're so excited to hear from Yehuda and become more empowered, equipped, educated to combat anti-Semitism and really teach our children how to be upstanders and be confident about their Judaism and to make sure that never again is now.
And please feel free to ask questions when Q&A time comes. I know that feeling of feeling so helpless is something that we've all felt over the past few months, and to be able to just hear from Yehuda and hear tips on really how we can make a difference, even in the smallest ways, can make us feel even the slightest bit more comforted. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Courtney and Caroline. I want to thank Vital Transformation for hosting and Yisrael Yentas for organizing this, and of course NJU Hatred for backing me up and giving me a platform to do what I do. I am the campus coordinator for NJU Hatred. And basically what that means is, it means two things. I run the campus fellowship. We have 15 fellows as of yesterday. We just got our newest fellow yesterday. Around the country on 15 different campuses, and they basically tell me what's going on with anti-Semitism, and we help them out. Whether it's legal advice, student government, money to bring speakers to campus or to hold protests, whatever it is that they need. The second thing is that I am usually the first person in NJU Hatred to deal with anything that happens on campus, even if we don't have a fellow. And what that means is that with October 7th and before and after, a lot of my day is being bombarded with stories of what happens to Jewish students on campus. And I think one of the most striking things that I've noticed, which is how I'm going to segue into our story here, is that a lot of people think that campus anti-Semitism started in 2019. Or some people I've even met that think it started after October 7th, which is a ridiculous notion to me, being that I graduated from undergrad in 2022 and I'm still in grad school. But I just started to realize that there's a lot of people who just aren't aware of what's going on. And so to kind of illustrate that, I'll tell you a little bit about my journey into pro-Israel and pro-Jewish advocacy. I started UC Santa Barbara in 2018. I came from an all-religious Jewish boys' school in LA called Valley Torah. I had never encountered the concept of anti-Semitism until I got to college. In my head, up until that point, It existed in terrorist organizations and in history books about the Nazis. That's all I knew about anti-Semitism. And so when I got to campus, my first experience was a BDS resolution. For those who don't know, BDS stands for Boycott, Divest, and Sanction the State of Israel. It is a movement that aims to get everybody around the world to just isolate Israel from a economic perspective. And since 2014, this movement has been sweeping campuses around the country. UC Santa Barbara, my alma mater, is the only UC campus to never have passed a BDS resolution, despite the fact that it has appeared on campus, I want to say, over 15 times in the last 10 years. And my freshman year, it was, I think, May, and somebody told me that I might be interested in what's going on in student government tonight, and so I came. And the meeting started at 6:30 p.m., and we left at 5:30 in the morning. For 11 hours, over 100 people spoke in public forum, both for and against BDS, and I heard some of the craziest stuff I've ever heard in my life. I heard people comparing the wall that is in the security barrier between Israel and the West Bank to the wall that Trump wanted to build between the U.S. and Mexico. I heard people saying that all Jews are white settlers. I heard people saying that Jews had lost the right to exist because of Israel's war crimes. Crazy stuff. That's just the highlights. But this was we're talking about hours of this straight. And that was the night I realized that I had to do something. I had to educate myself. I didn't know anything. And so that summer I went on Birthright. I joined the student government. And since then I had been just teaching myself and the people around me how to deal with this kind of thing. Now, I got lucky in the sense that there was already a great infrastructure at Santa Barbara of students who were committed to fighting this rising tide of anti-Semitism. But a couple of things I want to point out. That BDS resolution happened in 2019, before COVID. The campus BDS movement started in 2014, way back. And campus anti-Semitism in this wave has been around for at least 20 years. Now, why hasn't anyone been talking about it? Well, there's a few reasons. One of the reasons was what I got told when I started going to Santa Barbara. A lot of people in the community told me, wear a hat instead of a kippah, don't tell anybody that you're Israeli or Jewish, keep your head down, get your degree, and get out. And that's kind of the attitude that a lot of Jews in America take. And so people don't report what happens to them. People are embarrassed or afraid to say that this is what's going on campus. And then through COVID, I think one of the benefits of COVID was that, for better or worse, people started to speak up about their experiences. Maybe it was because we were all stir-crazy from being at home for so long, but for some reason, people started to speak up about their experiences, and campus anti-Semitism started coming to light. And it was already a minor story in the news before October 7th. And then October 7th happened. And I got to tell you, it was a tough day for all of us. But I think for those of us who work in my position, I have friends at many other organizations who do the same kind of work that I do, working directly with college students. The stories we heard in the first 2 weeks after were horrifying. I'm not going to get too graphic, but we're talking about people getting physically assaulted. We're talking about things like what happened at Cooper Union, where students were basically forced to hide in a library from an angry mob. That happened on campus. We're talking about students at NYU raiding the library. And this happened in California, in New York, in Florida, in Texas, in Canada, in Europe. And that was the second moment for me when I realized something. And that what I realized was that the only way to fight, whether it's campus anti-Semitism or anti-Semitism in general, is to, one, speak up, and two, be educated. And in my experience, all the campuses that I've worked with, the campuses that come out the best, the campuses that, whether or not you hear about anti-Semitism, they're the campuses that have the strongest Jewish communities, that are the most well-equipped to fight anti-Semitism, is where the students are both educated on the subject, whether it's Israel or the history of anti-Semitism, And two, they're brave enough, they're confident enough in themselves to stand up. And that brings me to today's topic of how to fight anti-Semitism in today's climate on your campuses, elementary, middle, high schools, your community, school board, elected officials, whatever it is. NJU Hatred has actually given me the opportunity to see a lot of these different spheres and how anti-Semitism and fighting anti-Semitism interacts with that. And the one thing I've noticed that works every time is being unapologetic. There was a time when being nice to a school administration and showing that you're better than the other side and showing that you're the calm and collected one and saying, see, look, I can be measured, they can't. There was a time that worked. At some campuses, it might still work. The majority of campuses that I've seen, it doesn't work anymore. That time has passed. It is time to be unapologetic about our Jewish identity, about our Zionism, and about our rights just as people. And the way I do it, I've managed to boil it down to 3 basic steps. Step number 1, understand the history of the Jewish people. What does that mean? The history of the Jewish people is a long and complicated one, and anybody who calls themselves Jewish has a very different connection to that history. You have Ashkenazi Jews, you have Sephardi Jews, Reformed, Orthodox, people who converted to Judaism, people whose parents converted to Judaism. They all have very different stories. And yet, when an anti-Semitism rises to the levels that we see it at now, nobody cares what your story is. But I think it's really important that you know what your story is, because understanding your history, understanding how you got here, how you became a Jew, helps instill that pride that gives you the confidence to say it out loud. And I think, if I may, that a big problem with our generation of, and when I say our, I'm talking about people who are in like late high school to just after college, but it applies all across. So I think most intensely in that age group these days, people are afraid, even before October 7th, to actually take ownership of their Jewish identity. And it's heartbreaking for me, because I know personally people, and I know of cases where what has been done to these students is legally actionable. We're talking about physical assault, and the person is too afraid to go to court. And so we can't help them, because if they don't want to go, we can't make them. And that's how anti-Semitism wins. When we are too afraid to fight back, when we don't want to make too much trouble for anybody, or we're afraid. I know a whole group of grad school students that are afraid for their jobs if they speak up about what's going on their campus. I won't say anything out loud. But that's the situation we're facing. And so understanding your history leads us to step 2. Step 2 is being proud to be a Jew. What does it mean to be proud to be a Jew? It means exactly that, but it also means it's more than going to protests and rallies, although that I believe is important. I believe that people should go to those things, and I think that that shows the world that we're proud to be Jewish. But I think it also has to do with carrying ourselves as if being Jewish is something to be proud of. And what I mean by that is, unfortunately, a lot of the times, my bigger problems come from people within the Jewish community who don't know how to handle themselves, who unfortunately say the wrong thing while on camera, or they're too afraid to fight back. And it creates actually larger problems. When we are scared to be Jewish, when we get defensive, when we get reactive, all we create is an environment that thinks it's okay and expects us to react like a wounded animal. Instead, when we're proud to be Jewish, when we understand that we have every right to be who we are as everybody else does, then we're not afraid of what other people might say. We're not afraid of the labels. We're not afraid of... Personally, if coming out of college, like, I'm starting to apply for jobs, and I had a conversation with my career counselor about how much pro-Israel stuff I have on my resume. I said, listen, it's who I am. If they don't like it, that's not my problem. I'm not taking it off. And I heavily believe in that. I understand why some people might choose differently, But I genuinely believe that if we want to have a chance of really fighting anti-Semitism on a large scale, then we have a responsibility to the rest of the Jewish people to be proud and claim our Judaism. That's step 2. Step 3 is, once you've understood the Jewish history, both with Israel, before Israel, after the state of Israel, and once you have claimed your Judaism and you're proud, speak up. Say something, anything. At school board meetings, to elected officials, in emails, call your congressman. Call the chancellor of your school. And it doesn't just have to be through words. If you are a donor at a school, if you sit on the committee of something, if you're whatever it is, I mean, we've seen a couple of things on the news in the last couple of months where big donors to college campuses pull out their money, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I'll tell you this, every school has a price. Enough money comes out, they'll start listening. Because that's what keeps them running. Their endowments is basically all they care about, in my experience with administrations. And so there are some people that I've met that their strategy basically is, when a school does something that they don't like, a lot of public schools have to make their donor lists public. And so there is an organization called Alums for Campus Fairness, where one of their strategies is they go down the donor list and they call one by one and they say, are you aware that this is what's happening at the school you're donating to? And they go to alumni. Alumni make up 30 to 40% of all campus donors across the country. And they just go to the alumni. They said, you went to this school. Are you okay that this is happening where you went to school? And this is wildly effective. Now, if you're wondering what you can do, maybe you're not on a school board, maybe you're not on a committee, maybe whatever. If you have a child, cousin, sibling, uncle, whatever, that is on campus, that is a student somewhere, and you've heard that something's happening on their campus, number 1, check on them. They're probably not okay. Number 2, ask them what they need. The students on campus are our number 1 resource for knowing what it is that campus community needs, and it's not the same at any 2 campuses. What I've learned as a campus coordinator is that the student knows their campus best. After about a year on campus, any given Jewish student who doesn't have their head in the sand, that is paying attention to what's going on, knows what it is their community needs to be able to understand their history, be proud, claim their Judaism, and stand up. And so reach out to your family, your friends. What can I do to help? If they need connections to a speaker, NJU Hatred is happy to help. There's dozens of other organizations out there. Connect them with them. A lot of students don't know that they have resources, and so they don't even know to reach out and ask for help because they don't know what's there. And the other thing you can do, it's gonna sound like the first thing I said, but it's a little different. Call your elected officials. Call your elected officials. Call your elected officials. Especially on the local level, when we're talking about state assemblymen or even congressmen. State assembly, city council, these kinds of governments, they have a lot of control over a school's budget. Even a private school, they have a lot of control over these schools, especially in New York. It works a little differently from state to state, but in New York, they have a lot of power over these schools. And NJU Hatred has had a campaign going for a couple of years called NJU Hatred Day, where we are encouraging elected officials to declare NJU Hatred Day in whatever district that they preside over. And we've actually gotten a couple of governors to do it. I don't remember exactly the states, but I believe it was Kentucky and Colorado. We've gotten state assembly members here in New York. We've gotten city council members here in New York City. We've gotten Rockland County. We've gotten people in New Jersey, in Michigan. This is starting to spread. And we're actually starting an initiative. Last year we got it on our first campus, but we got UC Santa Barbara, the student government, to recognize NJU Hatred Day. And what that does is basically, one, it calls attention to the issue, but also now that elected official has something that you can tie them to with their name on it, that if they want to run in your district, they have to speak to your issues. And now you can tell them, you promised that you made an NJU Hatred Day. You promised me that you would care about the Jewish people's issues. Where is your record on that? And that is something you can hold elected officials accountable for. And they're scared of that. And I ended up talking for a little bit of a shorter time than I expected, but that's basically it. That's the methods that I know work, and I think that if as many people as possible adopt this method and come out and be proud to be Jewish, then we can see large-scale change. I genuinely believe that. Thank you. Questions?
Okay.
Sure.
So this was fantastic. I'm glad to learn more about NJU Hatred, but one of the things that I'm very curious about is how do we get allies involved in talking about this as well? So you talked about elected officials, but I think it's beyond that, right? It's our neighbors, it's our friends, it's
For
the
sure.
people that are next to us, the people, whether it's in campuses or in communities. You know, we can't just be insular and talk about it within ourselves or know about it ourselves. We need to be able to do more. So is there anything that you've been doing on the college campus standpoint or anything else that you recommend
Right.
for others to do as well to bring allies into this?
Sure. So on campuses, there's a strategy called tabling, where basically a given student organization will sit with a plastic table and a bunch of, sometimes like merch or something, and they'll have people who are educated to speak on the subject, and they just sit there. And sometimes people walk up. It's different campuses have a different level of effectiveness with this. But on campus, that's my personal favorite way to educate the public. There are organizations out there. For example, there's an organization called Passages, which is a pro-Israel Christian organization. And a couple of my friends from UC Santa Barbara actually ended up working for them, so we end up at a lot of events together. And they're doing great work. They're educating the Christian community on these issues of both specifically Israel and anti-Semitism in general. But I think that outside of the college sphere, the only way to get this done is to be mildly annoying. If it's kind of, you have to kind of walk the line, but annoy your friends about this. Send them news articles about what's going on in Israel. Send them news articles about what they did to the hostages. Send them news articles about what's going on campus. Just don't give them the option of being unaware. Especially the people that were on board with every other social justice movement in the last 3 years. The same people that posted a black square during the height of the BLM riots during COVID, same people who are posting Stop Asian Hate, all those people have no right to be silent on this issue. If they're silent on every issue, that's one thing. They just don't want to say anything, and that's their right. They have the right to not say anything. But if somebody claims to be an ally of every minority, I got news for you, we're a tiny minority. Jews are less than 2% of the country, and we are less than 0.02% of the world. There are smaller minorities, but not many. And I think that doing that will help change the narrative where SJP and other left-wing / pro-Palestinian organizations have been very effective in creating this narrative where all Jews are basically white people. And a lot of us can't help it. There's a lot of Ashkenazi Jews who, on spec, just look like a regular white person. But that's because they don't know the history. And a lot of Ashkenazi Jews don't know their own history. They don't know the history of, they might know that the Holocaust happened, but they don't know the pogroms. They don't know that even after the Holocaust, there was another pogrom in Poland. Days after the war ended, there was a pogrom in Poland. 60-something people died and were buried in a mass grave. That's a thing that happened. A lot of people don't know that. And I think that basically just being mildly annoying and force-feeding this information down the throats of your friends and neighbors, it has to start like that, and eventually, at a certain point, either they'll be willing to learn more and they'll ask you, are there events, is there a website I can go to, and you send them to whatever websites you get your information from. I think it's also important to combat disinformation. A lot of disinformation out there, coming from both sides. There's accounts that are pro-Israel, pro-Jewish and everything, but they get things wrong, and then they don't apologize. And that's just as toxic as SJP posting lies about what's going on in Gaza. So I hope that was a good enough answer to your question. But yeah, so be annoying and combat disinformation. Make sure you have real facts.
We
Yes.
have a question here from Zoom. How can we reach the TikTok youth, 18 to 24, where anti-Semitism is rampant, and educate them on a wide scale, even though they are unwilling to hear facts and history? Really good question.
Well, I think that we have to change our approach. I don't think that they are unwilling to hear facts in history. I think that they have been so desensitized to the kind of thing that we're used to saying about Jewish history, about the Holocaust, etc., that they're not unwilling to hear facts, it just doesn't move them anymore. Why? Because there's so much information available in so little time. Whatever hits first usually cements. So how do you walk that back? How do you walk that initial impression back? And for a lot of them, it has to be a conversation with somebody they know personally. If you want to be a keyboard warrior, I'm not going to stop you, but I will tell you that it's a low success rate. Arguing with strangers over the internet almost never works. If you know how to do it, please let me know. I would love to learn. But if you know these people personally, then I think very gently, starting a conversation about why they believe what they believe. Before you even come to, don't tell them that this is what you believe and you think that they're wrong. Just say, hey, I saw you posted this. I'm interested to know more. Why do you, what makes you say that? And a lot of times what I've seen work is as they're actually thinking out their opinions out loud for the first time, because a lot of these people, they learned what they learned on the internet and they never talked about it with anybody. They just post it online, and it's this positive feedback loop. And the algorithms of most social media apps don't help, because they like one post and then they just see more posts exactly like it. And so they never see another perspective. So once you have them talking about their own opinions, just ask questions. Say, okay, where did you learn that? Have you seen this? And if done right, and it's very hard to do it right while also not getting angry at them, I will admit I have made that mistake several times. I still do. It's tough. But I think that if you manage to walk them through and just keep asking them questions to make them think through their own opinions again, about half of them will, at the very least, say that they don't know enough yet, and they'll go do their own research. And that's really what I want people to do. If a person has done their own research, and they've have their information from credible sources, they have true information, and they come down on the side of Hamas, I heavily disagree with them, but I have nothing left to argue about with them. And our goal shouldn't be to change every single person's mind. There are lost causes. We cannot change everybody's mind. But we can make people understand that attacking somebody on a college campus for something that's happening 3,000 miles away isn't okay under any circumstances. You don't need to have a political opinion to know that that's wrong. And the reason that it's happening is because these students that are the perpetrators of what's going on campus and on campuses have been indoctrinated into thinking that they're actually helping. They really believe that this will further the cause of Palestinians in Gaza. They genuinely believe this. Which is terrible, but also I want to talk to whoever did the marketing campaign. They've done a genius marketing campaign. It's amazing to see. Really, it is amazing to see. I've talked to people who have they drank the Kool-Aid completely. They really believe this. So if you just get them to question themselves, say, maybe I don't know everything, and do a couple of Google searches, you're well on your way.
I have another question. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay. As an educator in the public school system in Canada, I have seen a decrease in education about the Holocaust at all grade levels.
Yeah.
Our province has now come out with a mandate to increase Holocaust education in schools.
Saw
This,
that.
unfortunately, has missed a whole generation. Ask your public school system how much Holocaust education is being delivered in your system.
Yes. Holocaust education is important, but I want to add a caveat. I think that, and this may be a controversial topic, I'm happy to argue with you about it later.
Sure.
As a people,
The person who asked the question.
as a people, I think that we focus too much on the Holocaust. And I think what I mean by that is that there are a lot of people out there that think that the Holocaust is the only bad thing to ever happen to the Jewish people.
Right.
It's there are Jews that think that the only bad thing that ever happened to the Jewish people was the Holocaust. They don't know anything. And so we keep harping on the Holocaust because it's the most recent and most terrible in anybody's memory. So, yes, it is an important topic, and we should educate people about it. But we should also educate people about the Inquisition. We should also educate people about the pogroms. We should also educate people about what it was like to be Jewish here in the 60s. Like, it's more recent than the Holocaust. It's much more, I mean, in 2019, I was writing a resolution in the student government in Santa Barbara condemning Spain for having a Nazi parade because they had one in 2019 and nobody noticed. And in the Netherlands, they had a parade where people basically dressed up as a parody of like Haredi Jews, and they put on these huge noses and fake paves. And this was a thing that just happened. No, so the second one was in the Netherlands. The Nazi thing was in Spain. Like this didn't happen 60 years ago. This happened 5 years ago, and no one noticed. And I think when you just send things that you know happened to people, just articles. This is what happened. This is a fact. I think the vast majority of people just are unaware of how much there is in the world, and the news will only cover something for a certain amount of time, and then the public attention span will switch to something else. It happened with China and the Uyghurs, which that's still going on, by the way. As soon as Hamas's war on Israel started, people paid a lot less attention to Russia and Ukraine. It's a natural thing in the news, and that's fine. So it's up to us to keep it in public perception. Make sure that people know that it didn't end, we just stopped talking about it.
Also, just to add on, I totally agree with you because Brooke and I read this AJC event, and Laura Shaw Frank was saying how, we need to talk about the fact that we started as a people in Israel, and that the first time we experienced anti-Semitism wasn't called that, was being expelled from there. So I think it's how do we get schools to, I agree, not just talk about the Holocaust, but talk about, the fact that we are not, it's like a two-pronged question, but not a religion. Because we are a religion, but we're also a people. And I think that's what's very confusing for people, is that we're not just, we don't discuss religions at the school, etc. That's a big thing that comes up.
Sure.
But how do we say, okay, we're actually a people indigenous to a land called Israel, and that since it became a place, we've been expelled from that. And then, maybe the history of our persecution, because the Holocaust is really like after many, many, many persecutions. So I guess how do we get schools to help teach that history and see us as a people, not just a religion?
So I think that the best speaker I've heard on that specific subject is a woman named Charlotte Korczak at Stand With Us. She's my favorite speaker. She came to Santa Barbara 4 times in 4 years, and I got to introduce her 3 of those times, and it was like being able to introduce a rock star to me. Like, she's my favorite speaker. And I think she put it the most concisely, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. But basically, we can use the definition of Zionism. Because basically, a lot of people think that Zionism is a purely political movement, which it's not. Political Zionism is a thing. Political Zionism did start with Theodor Herzl, but Zionism is a much older belief than Theodor Herzl. Zionism is basically the idea that the Jewish people have the right to self-determine in their historic homeland. In one sentence. What does that mean? There's a concept in international law that anyone who's recognized as a people, the Jewish people are recognized as a people, according to most interpretations of international law, has the right to self-determine in their historic homeland. That's a thing. Since the creation of the UN. And that's helped a lot of European nations self-determine. It's helped a lot of South American and African nations self-determine. It's basically how we have the current concept of a country. And if you accept that the Jewish people are a people, and if you don't, then you're anti-Semitic. By the way, if you don't accept that the Jewish people are people, then you are anti-Semitic. Why? Again, it goes back to learning Jewish history. Just understand where we came from. You don't have to go as far back as Abraham. I would, but you don't have to. You can go back to the archaeological evidence of the city of David. We were there. We were a sovereign nation in that land thousands of years ago. That's a fact. Many nations throughout history have records of taking us into slavery. The Romans have records of sacking Jerusalem. The Romans have records of dragging Jews out of Israel and spreading them all over the empire. There are Assyrian records of this. It doesn't just have to be Jewish archaeology. Do archaeology anywhere in the world of any power that interacted with the Jewish people throughout history, we've been there. We are a people. So if you believe that the Jewish people are a people, and you believe that any people has the right to self-determine, then you believe that the Jewish people have the right to self-determine. And the final piece is Israel. I like to joke a lot with my friends about how maybe if we had taken Argentina, this wouldn't be a problem. Back in the day, there were talks in the Zionist conferences that Theodor Herzl held and his successors about where they should build this Jewish state. And a majority wanted it in the historic homeland of Israel, but a lot of people were okay being in Uganda or in Argentina. And I think that having the Israel component involved is both vitally important and massively complicated. Because what we're asking the world to do is understand that Israel is our homeland, but also understand that not everything the Israeli government does is the fault of Jews in America. You are fully allowed to disagree with everything the Israeli government has done since 1945 and still not be anti-Zionist. What you can't do is say that Israel, the only Jewish state and the home of the Jewish people, does not have the right to exist. And a lot of people, when having this argument on college campuses or with just people they know, get confused between the two. Because on the one hand, they want to have Israel be their recognized homeland, because it is our homeland. The Jewish people became the Jewish people in Israel. We were a tribe, we were a group of tribes before, we were in slavery in Egypt, etc. But where we became the Jewish people, the Jews, the Israelites, we're called the Israelites, the land is called Israel. That it was in that land, historically. And so I think the important thing to do there is, number one, make people understand that the Jewish people are a people, and so they have the right to self-determine in their historic homeland, which an overwhelming amount of your archaeological evidence will tell you that historic homeland is Israel. The other half is understanding the difference between the right to exist and whether somebody is morally in the right or not. I was a philosophy major in undergrad. There is no moral framework accepted by anybody that says that a person can lose the right to exist, which is why a lot of people are against the death penalty. Now imagine that on an entire people scale. What people who say that Israel doesn't have the right to exist are basically saying that the Jewish people are either not a people, which they are flying in the face of an ungodly amount of archaeological evidence, or they're saying that the Jewish people lost the right to exist. Either way, they're either in denial or wildly anti-Semitic. And I want to add one more thing. Jewish people being indigenous to Israel does not deny the fact that Palestinians can also be indigenous to the same land. Two people can be indigenous to the same land. We see this all over Africa. When the Europeans finally moved out in the late 1800s and down to the mid-1900s, they kind of just left tribes who didn't like each other in the same countries, because they just drew lines along completely arbitrary borders and left it to be a mess. Same thing in India and Pakistan. Nobody in India and Pakistan thinks that the other group isn't indigenous to there. They just hate each other. And that's a separate issue. What we've allowed to happen, especially in the West, is that we've allowed the conversation to become about whether Jews are indigenous instead of how do we figure out a way for everybody to live without killing each other. And I think that we need to stop with that first conversation, because that means we're granting their premise of, oh, the Jewish people's right to exist in Israel is in doubt. It's not. We should stop pretending like it is.
I agree. And one more that was great follow-up to that is, I agree that can both be indigenous. And I guess it's the billion-dollar question is, how do you, there's history of, we have tried, Israel has tried to say, okay, here, take this land, we'll call it Palestine. No, we don't want that. We want everything. So you're dealing with a group of people, history is saying it, who they're not happy with a two-state solution.
Mm-hmm.
They want to eradicate our entire people. So how did we even deal with that? I mean,
It's a great question.
yeah, I don't know what the answer, but
I'm not going to tell you that I have the solution to peace right here, right now. I wouldn't be here if I did. But I think it starts with the leadership. Historically, every time we've been close to some sort of peace with the Palestinians, whether it's the Oslo Accords or Camp David, although I refute that we were ever close at Camp David, it's the Palestinian leadership that does not allow them to just live their lives. Any aid money that goes, whether it's to the West Bank or to Gaza, does not end up in the hands of the people. It ends up in the hands of Abu Mazen and Hamas. They don't see the aid money. They don't see anything. All they see is Israeli airstrikes, is Israeli soldiers raiding their homes, very often with good reason, and sometimes not with great reason. The Israeli military has made mistakes, and sometimes it's intentionally done things that are wrong. That doesn't mean that Israel doesn't have the right to exist.
right.
And I think that the only way forward is education. A lot of Palestinian children are educated with basically nothing but the Quran and hating Jews and America. And we need to start there. But I think we also, equally important is, we need an entire,
Yeah.
Iran's not helping, but I think that if Palestinians would educate their own children better, if the Palestinian leadership was more interested in leading their people to safety, just to the safety of Palestinians, forget the safety of Israelis, they just want Palestinians to be safe. If they actually wanted that, then they would understand that dealing with Iran is not good for their own people. They would understand that constantly encouraging terrorist attacks against the state of Israel is not good for their own people. And so,
sorry.
yeah.
No, so there's something called a platform that's called Echoes and Reflection.
Okay.
And it has courses for educators and lesson plans that can help, but it's not just for educators, anyone can get on it. And there's a course that's called Teaching About Contemporary Anti-Semitism from February 12th to March 11th. That will help us with.
Great.
Yeah. So Echoes
I'm
and
interested.
Reflection is the name of the platform.
Perfect. Very cool. Yeah, so I think that kind of education is important both here and for children in Gaza, for children in the West Bank. Because, I mean, as with everything else, the next generation is what matters.
Yep.
The children of today are what the future is going to look like. So if we want to change anything, you have to educate the children. Anything else?
So much.
Yeah.
I have just two quick thoughts. Number one, you made me think of I wonder if there's a campaign to reach civilians, Palestinian civilians, about how awful Hamas is, and if that's being done in any way to really showcase to them.
I don't know. I don't know if there's a campaign. There might be, but I don't know.
I doubt you can even reach them.
Yeah, that's the bigger problem.
Yeah.
So, one, it's not just Hamas. There's other organizations
Right.
in Gaza that are working against the Palestinians' own interests and against the Palestinians learning anything else.
Yeah.
There's Hamas. There's Palestinian Islamic Jihad. There's
Right.
Hezbollah. There's lots of stuff over there. Plus, there's just people who, while not necessarily militants themselves, have been brainwashed, are so steadfast in their hatred that they're lost causes, and that's what they're teaching their own children. So it's not just Hamas. I want to iterate for in case that wasn't clear. I'm not saying that the only problem between Israel and Palestine are the terrorist organizations. There's a lot of other problems
Yeah.
before we get to peace. But I think that the biggest ones is that the leadership isn't allowing us to try anything else.
Yeah. I think that also one thing that maybe, I don't know if you guys can do it, but we need to get into the public schools. and do these kinds of lectures in public schools, not just Jewish schools. Because a lot of our kids are in public schools and they don't know how to deal with it.
I mean, our kids are in private schools and they don't have to deal with it. We're not in Jewish schools.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah, you're right, there's no language around
So
this.
I think if you're a parent of a child at a public school, at a private school that's not, a school that's not Jewish, I think the only answer is get involved in your child's education. Go annoy the teachers and the principals and whatever other administrators there are over there. Go annoy them. Like seriously, like have school assemblies about it.
We need to educate them.
So I went to public school growing up, and in my 7th grade class, my history teacher was teaching about the Golden Age in Spain and mentioned nothing about Jews. Then heard my last name, which is an Arabic last name, and said, "Oh, are you sure you're Jewish?" So my dad made me create a PowerPoint. So he created it with me and gave it to the teacher, and then the teacher had me share it with all of the classes. So like you really have to like get involved with the teachers sometimes to really like, you know.
No, they really don't know.
Huh?
Well, no, but we've been meeting with, the DEI and curriculum guy, it's, and AJC has been very helpful, American Jewish Committee of New York. It's hard because there's a lot of, I think the issue is there's a lot of parents who, I don't know if they've been sleeping, but they have, or I think, Jews have felt scared to say anything because we have had a good few past decades. So I think that there is, we don't want to seem privileged or this or, it's tough. I think there's that component.
Yeah.
And now we're all realizing like, oh my God, obviously there's an educational problem because look at college campuses.
Yeah.
Like that would not have happened if we were all in college.
Well, I just want to say that it has been going on longer. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I graduated college in 2005. It wasn't something that I ever thought about. But I know that it had to have started back before 2014.
It was just quiet.
Yeah.
It was just quiet, right? But then
sure.
the other thing is, I'm not a parent, but I don't know if anybody's seen what's been going on in the Brookwood Public School and kindergarten with Qatari.
Oh my God,
Or
yes.
Qatar.
And the map.
With
Yes,
the map.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think another thing to just think about, just because we're having a discussion now,
Yeah.
is that, it's going in and talking about Jewish education and educating about Judaism is important. But we need to also say there are other things to talk about too.
Yeah.
And that it's not just this. We're not just saying this is the only thing to talk about. It just needs to be included plus. And what is the true education versus what is propaganda being said? Because to your point before, there is Jewish propaganda to an extent, but not really. And then there's also other propaganda that's happening. What are the true facts of true education that needs to be taught, and that it can be taught along other things? It's not the one and only thing, but it also needs to be taught so that what is happening is that there is no more hatred. And NJU Hatred is important, but ending hatred, period. One thing that's really bothering me specifically is I'm seeing different accounts that are saying this person is doing this against Jews, but then they're hating against that person too. We gotta stop the hate. We need to educate, and we all need to find ways to live peacefully together, but if we just continue to hate on the next, we're not stopping anything.
Right.
We're just making this a cyclical
Absolutely.
thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, at every level this starts with education, but I think also at every level, no matter where you get involved, it can also affect the level of education. Like, so at the elected official level, for example, in California, for a while there was something in the state legislature over there that would have changed the Holocaust education curriculum to something that, I didn't read the entire curriculum, but it bordered on untrue, the stuff that was in there. I don't know if it was purposefully false or just woefully undereducated. But the kind of stuff, and it all filters back to that these people just genuinely don't know anything.
Yeah.
Like even college professors,
I'm learning now.
even college professors, people with PhDs in European history also don't know things. Why? My personal opinion is that it is a lot easier to get a degree today than it was a couple decades ago. I think the standards of education in general have just dropped in America.
There's a commentary on how the Black Lives Matter movement in the U.S. has been silent on what's going on.
Well, isn't
Yeah.
there a piece, I mean, I think a big piece of this too is that it's not just about education, it's how you learn.
Yeah.
So like critical thinking, for example, it's
Yes.
not being taught. There's a professor at Northwestern that did a good like real TikTok on how to critically think.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the areas that needs to be encouraged alongside the education of how do I critically think through this so that I can make decisions that with more clarity.
Sure.
Because that's really another piece that's like hindering people.
Yeah,
from
no,
making
critical thinking is
decisions.
important. You have to be able to analyze your own opinions. You have to be able to analyze what you read, what you see. I mean, I got lucky in a couple of very good schools that taught me how to critically think, and I've been able to do this since I was a kid. But I recognize that a lot of people were just never taught how, and
Or facts, that's what they're doing now. They're teaching social justice without facts.
right, and
Right.
but I think back to Rachel.
Yeah.
Back to Rachel's point. The only reason that they're successful is because people don't know how to analyze what they hear. Falsehood would not work if people knew how to think and check for themselves.
So it has to start with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for
so
everyone who came on
much.
Zoom.
Yeah.
You're amazing, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.